I was thinking, should I leave it like this and have it almost black and white looking? What do you guys think? Sorry for those who can't see right now. I'm wearing my outfit. I've got my detective cap on and my coat. I would have liked to have maybe something else underneath, like a vest or something like that. But this will work for now. I was just messing around a little bit with the white balance. It's not going to normally look like this, as you can see. It looks more like that. It's like a gray, but when I have it this way, it almost looks like blue. I left it like that for a second. Anyway, that was a really long-winded intro. Hello and welcome everybody to episode 23 of the 6 Pixels Under podcast. I am nerdSlayer, your host. I'm wearing my garb today because we had some bonanza last week, and we finally got up to 50. We dropped back to 48, but I'm not going to hold that against you guys. On this week's podcast, it's going to be just about 2 hours. I'm trying to keep it under 2 hours. I've got to talk to my moderator, Card, who's, by the way, sitting in the lobby right now to answer or queue up questions for me for the in section dubbed call-in. But I need to talk to Card about Star Trek Online, which is the next death of a game. Anyway, some more things we'll talk about today are Anthem not doing so hot in regards to sales. We'll talk a bit about Paradox doing particularly well, Paradox Interactive, and maybe the teasing of a new Vampire the Masquerade game. There's also Sony, who is refunding people who pre-ordered Overkills the Walking Dead, as that thing got canceled, which I don't think I've ever heard of a game getting canceled post-launch, but 4 months after it launched, it's getting canceled, whatever that means. And yeah, also Nintendo, apparently Reggie stepping down. Some other guy named Doug Bowser's taking over, which is way too fitting. And then, of course, we've got the MMOs on the Go segment, the call-in segment, as I mentioned at the end, where you can ask me whatever kind of question you want. You can sit in Discord and ask me in voice, or you can send me a message in particular, or at me in Twitch chat, whatever tickles your fancy. Outfit hype, yeah. I don't have my headset on because I think it ruined my outfit a little bit, but I'm also really tired. Man, you can see the bags in my eyes. I need to make it black and white again. Black and white suits me. The less color makes me look like I'm dead, though. Makes me look like I'm half dead. I don't know why there isn't just a simple black and white button on my camera options. That'd be pretty cool. I need to figure that out, but I'll figure that out some other time. All right, let me get my title out here. What is up, everybody? What are you guys up to on this Monday afternoon or Monday morning, whatever time it is for you guys where you're at? No cigar. I've got something to smoke, that's all right, but not that kind. Thanks for the bit donation, Germa2. I appreciate that. Wow, 1,000. Pretty cool. I don't know how that stuff works. So you can like put a bit donation and attach it to an emote, and it makes it like a super emote. Or anyway, black and white stream for the classic vibes. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I don't see a black and white filter. It's pretty strange. Is this sub mode? No, somebody was handing out. AKH was handing out a bunch of subs last time on stream. Oh, that was you as well, Germa? I didn't know that. 1,500 bits. Thanks for the 1,500 bit donation. All right, let's go ahead and get to our first topic of the day, of the week, if you will. I wanted to talk a bit about the sales of Anthem. Now, for those who've been following the story, I've been covering on and off, not really interested in playing the game myself, but just more so interested in the story surrounding it because of Bioware, obviously. Bioware being a big company that I've followed in my life, but also has probably had some of the most recent failures and isn't looking so hot. And so as the article on screen states, Anthem's physical sales were half of Mass Effect Andromeda's, which is not really totally surprising, obviously, for those who've been following. Andromeda didn't have the best reception, but at the core of it, there is still some Mass Effect game in there, somewhere. With Anthem, I think it's a little bit harder to stomach that because it's not Mass Effect. It's no IP in particular, right? It's a new IP, and it's not a particularly useful or inventive or interesting IP enough on the merit of its story or premise alone, like I would say of Mass Effect. The premise alone of Mass Effect to me is interesting, which means you've got a strong IP or a strong universe. If even just thinking about it is interesting to you. All right, so it says we're talking about box sales here, which is like, I mean, of course, box sales in general are going to lower because people are less and less buying box copies. In fact, I stopped buying box copies because the last time I bought a box copy game was probably Skyrim, and it came with like a Steam code inside. There was no disc. And I was just thinking to myself, what's the point in even buying this? I'm basically paying more money, and I'm not getting anything extra except a box that doesn't even have box art in it anymore, or a map or anything like it used to. Currently playing my guilty pleasure gacha game on the mobile phone, and it's not Diablo Immortal. Well, that's good to know. This worries me, I would say, because ultimately, I know people like to think about BioWare as a company that could never fail, right? I mean, how could BioWare fail? They've been there since like 99, right? Or 98. They've created such classic games. How could they, of all companies, fail? Obviously, I covered how they ended up being acquired by EA, which is a crazy story. If you've never heard the story of how BioWare got acquired, it's a nuts story. And I detailed it in the SWOTOR video. But basically, they were getting involved in making a MMO, and of course they needed funding, so they got bought slash invested in by a publisher, by an investment group. But the strange thing is that the investment group was actually led by the previous CEO, or CFO rather, of EA. And so he was actually the owner of this investment group. So as soon as they acquired BioWare, he immediately sold it to EA, pretty much immediately sold it to EA, and then came on as a board, as a member of the board. I think he also took another high-ranking position back at EA, but basically just a crazy like circumstance where a guy who just happened to have worked for EA in the past acquires a large stake in BioWare to the point to where they basically sold them off to EA. And so same thing happened to who's the guys that did the first Battlefront and the second Battlefront? Pandemic? Is that Pandemic Studios? I think that's Pandemic. Yeah, it's Pandemic Studios. They also did the Saboteur Mercenaries, the Mercenaries series, Lord of the Rings Conquest. What else did they? Just Destroy All Humans. I didn't know Pandemic was the one that did Destroy All Humans. They also did Batman the Dark Knight. Don't remember that game. Star Wars, the best of... Yeah, so anyway. This also happened to Pandemic. They were also one of the ones gobbled up by this investment company and then sold to EA. And of course, as you know, Pandemic was kind of shuttered. BioWare wasn't, of course, because BioWare was still putting out good games and very good games. And they also had put so much money, time, and investment into SWOTOR. There was no way EA would just abandon that investment. It's too much money. And so after seeing kind of the success, or lack of success rather, of Anthem, it has me wondering if this is finally the point where we can start worrying about the future of BioWare. I know like people were already worrying back when Dragon Age Inquisition came out. It did well, like sales-wise, but just from a creative standpoint. Obviously, all the drama surrounding Mass Effect Andromeda, people were up in arms about the animations, the dialogue, the script. All of it was kind of a mess, right? And we find out it was made like basically by like the C team at BioWare. I'm not really convinced there's an A team anymore. I think that's kind of a meme at this point. We were saying C team worked on Mass Effect Andromeda as a way to kind of explain to ourselves why that was okay, but at this point, I feel like there is no A team. I mean, they lost so many of their key developers. And as you can see with the lack of effort, or I should say low effort project they just put out with Anthem. And I say low effort in regards to their other standards. I don't just mean period. I'm sure they put much more effort and money into their game than most people could ever dream of. But yeah, certainly little bit of a case to be worried for Bioware, because EA is not an all-forgiving company. If you stop making money and you're not being successful anymore, they're going to fold you. I mean, they've done it before. It's not a matter of when or if. Or sorry, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, right? And how successful you're going to be doing. I think you can also take a look at SWTOR. SWTOR is basically on the downest trend it's ever been since, you know, probably after Shadow of Revan, right? Before they had the KOTFE like expansions come out. They were at a pretty low downturn, and they don't even have a roadmap for the current year, 2019, in the works for SWTOR. And just for whatever reason, people aren't questioning enough, and they're not getting that, which makes me really think like BioWare is kind of reaching a point where something has to stick. Otherwise, I'm not really sure what they're going to end up doing as a company. I mean, they're not making money with any of the games that are currently out right now. Live games, I should say. I'm sure they're still making money on royalties or whatever they're selling from previous games. Isn't SWTOR asking for crowdfunding? Oh, God. I mean, at this point, isn't microtransactions or loot boxes crowdfunding? I mean, can we just call it like it is? I mean, that's crowdfunding at this point to me. That's kind of how I see it, at least. It's certainly seeming that way. Okay. Let's go ahead and get into the Paradox topic that I wanted to mention. As I mentioned at the top, Paradox Interactive, the company or publisher rather behind a number of games. I mean, I could just click on our products here, so I don't have to remember them all from memory. But I know there's what's this game called? Europa Universalis. They've got Hearts of Iron, Stellaris, Tyranny, of course. Obsidian launched through Paradox. The White Wolf franchise, they purchased them back in 2015, so they own that whole Vampire the Masquerade namesake. Crusader Kings. I actually forgot all about Crusader Kings. And then City Skylines, which I don't know if that one really has the most positive reception. But anyway, they've been doing particularly well. I think it said that they're up 39% of revenues, and their operating profit jumped up 34%. It's had its most profitable quarter ever, apparently. And this is making kind of the rumors surrounding another Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines game kind of more realistic to me, because Paradox is essentially having its best time, right? Which means that theoretically speaking, and this is speculation, of course, but theoretically speaking, that would be the most like logical time that they would decide to want to pursue a new IP or a previous IP that maybe they had worked with in the past or acquired in the past, but never had the chance to necessarily create a game for yet. White Wolf was acquired 4 years ago in 2015, which kind of tells me, like, timeline-wise, it would make a whole lot of sense that if there was going to be a new Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, or Vampire the Masquerade game, released, it would be within the next couple of years, right? According to that timeline. There was actually some bit of news in this that came up recently. I think there was an app, they called it Tinder, which apparently stands for teeth in Swedish. Paradox, for those who don't know, is a Swedish company. Apparently, there's some type of dating app that they're targeting. Let's watch the video. Hope I don't get copy striked again, like last time. That's why I didn't upload episode 21 or 20, was it? I had like 10 seconds of a movie clip, and they copyrighted it. And whenever I disputed it, they still would not relinquish it.
Whoever you are, wherever you are, your soulmate is within reach. Discover the science of emotions. Tender, your soulmate algorithm.
Interesting. Further teases, they said, according to this article, was they showed the Santa Monica Pier, which for those who played Bloodlines, you remember where that is. When considering all of the evidence available so far, it wouldn't be surprising if, yeah. So, I mean, basically the same shit that I'm saying here. But it's interesting, right? I mean, I loved Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, flaws and all. If the game didn't just basically fall on its ass like the other half of the game, I think it would have been remembered as a truly great game. Even with all the updates, all the community patches and everything, the game is still kind of lacking a lot. Like, it just clearly was a very rushed product. I I don't know how I feel about another game being erected in the same universe. Just because it's the same universe doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be done well. I mean, if you think about it, they kind of like White Wolf struck gold the first time with Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, and I know there was a game before that, but more so Bloodlines is the one that I think about because that's the one that Troika was involved with. And Troika Games, I covered them on my channel. They also had developers like Leonard Boyarsky, who worked on Diablo and Fallout. Of course, they had Tim Kaine, who also worked on Fallout. They had Jason Anderson. Is it Jason Anderson? I can't remember off the top of my head. But anyway, it was basically 3 guys. They were all creatives, and they did amazing work. They did Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. They did Arcanum. They did the D&D game. I can't remember off the top of my head. They put out some really good quality games, and that's the team that's currently working now at Obsidian, working on the Outer Worlds. So I felt like I should get that out of the way because it might be a little bit misleading to kind of imply that this is like the same team. The Bloodlines team is the same one working on this game. In fact, I saw a recent article, and I can't remember where it is off the top of my head, but there was a recent article that said that the team that's working on this new rumored Vampire the Masquerade game is actually a multiplayer company. Like, apparently they worked on Blacklight Retribution, is what I'm hearing, or worked on Blacklight. So that's obviously doesn't necessarily mean the most per se. I mean, sometimes a unproven company can put out good work, right? But it does have you a little bit worried of like, is this going to be anywhere close to the same quality that we expect, coming off of Masquerade Bloodlines? I mean, that's just a fantastic game. The voice overs, the vocal animations, the facial animations are amazing. Of course, it uses the Source engine. It was like lightning trapped in a bottle, except it was like Office Space in the sense that it wasn't a hit when it was in theaters. It wasn't a hit until like posthumously, essentially. But I've always found Bloodlines interesting for that reason. Blacklight Retribution does not have the best reputation, I would say. Okay. What else do I? All right, so this one I figured we could talk about because it's totally related to the series that I do, obviously, Death of a Game. And that's, apparently there's some information concerning the recent Overkill Walking Dead game, which, if you haven't already heard of it, I recommend just Googling it to see kind of why it has a very negative reception. Overkill, if I remember correctly, is published by Starbreeze, which is the same company that does the Payload games and Payload 2. Sorry. Can you guys see this part? Look at this. It says it's canceled, and then you scroll down and it's like not canceled. And the thing that makes me laugh is that it says not canceled and it says postponed. And I'm thinking to myself, how can a game that's post-launch be postponed? Right? Like, it's a multiplayer game. It launched. How is it postponed? Like, what does that mean? I feel like they missed a step here. When your game's launched, it means you cancel it when you stop like developing it, or you shut it down. I don't understand how you postpone it. Like, you postpone it for now and then you work on it later? Like, what exactly does that mean? Oh, so PC is out, but the console's not. So what they mean is that they postponed the console versions to possibly fix issues that the PC versions are having. I could see that. That would make sense to me. That would make more sense. Huh. According to PlayStation, what they said was, the publisher has notified us that the game is canceled. So it's only canceled on the console? Sorry. Postpone, that just cracks me up. Least surprising news of the day goes to Overkill. Isn't it interesting that they essentially tried to make a Left 4 Dead clone with none of the same charm, and basically none of the charm nor intrigue of the Walking Dead franchise. And, you know, frankly speaking, I think that franchise is a little played out at this point, past the comics and past probably the first 3 seasons of the show. I don't know if it's really strong based on its narrative anymore, which is, narrative ultimately is what interests me. If a game doesn't have a narrative, I have no reason to keep playing it, I guess. Like, I don't see a reason to keep playing it. And some people say, well, fun. But there's tons of fun things that I do in my life that are probably more fun than, like, the majority of, like, a game that's only fun because the gameplay is fun. Like, that's not usually enough. Unless it's, like, Academy. If it's, like, really good gameplay, it can stand the test of time. Absolutely. I totally believe in that. Temple of Elemental Evil. I appreciate that, Linko64. That's right. Overkill ironically overkilled their niche market with Payday, World War II heist thing, and then Walking Dead. Yeah, they kind of were putting out very similar products, huh? Weirdly enough, I know it's totally related because of Walking Dead, but kind of reminds me of Telltale, doesn't it? Company who just kept basically shipping out different versions of the same game. Can we report that G2A ad for scamming? I don't know. Like, what can you do about these ads? The time of day or your general location? Huh. Wonder why I would get a G2A ad based on my location or time of day. Anyway. Yeah, I mean, Overkill probably looks like they're going to be shutting down, right? I know that there's been a lot of recent drama concerning a Starbreeze. Apparently, there was like a literal reenactment of the game Payload, where some guy was doing insider trading or something like that. The FBI or whatever the Swedish equivalent shows up to the actual like company. I believe it's a Swedish company, right? Or is it a Danish company? Sorry, sorry that I would dare get you guys confused. It's a Nordic company, okay? I know that. That's the more safe thing to say. It's a Nordic company. But anyway, like the authorities literally show up at the office, grab a bunch of PCs, and ship them off because they're going to go do some analysis to see if insider trading and any illegal activities actually took place. So yeah, basically Overkill or Starbreeze Studio, I believe they're called, is having a real life Payload game experience, if you will. I don't know if that company is going to end up getting shut down. And it's also unbelievably weird how many game companies or developers or even publishers are involved in all of this. 505 Games, Overkill, you've got Starbreeze. What's the other company that's involved? There's another company involved as well. I can't remember off the top of my head. Why are there so many companies involved in this damn game? Probably because they created some type of like subsidiary thing. Let's see. Okay, so they are a Swedish company. I got that part right. That's good. Starbreeze Studios. Video game development studio publisher. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, so it's a subsidiary. I was right. So Overkill Software is their subsidiary. That would make sense why there's so many damn companies involved in this thing. It's also smart because they don't have to put them under their games develop list, right? Just kidding. They do because they're actually published by a separate publisher on console, 505 Games apparently. Okay, so it's all making sense now. The developer is Overkill. Their normal publisher is Starbreeze, aka their subsidiary parent company. And then 505 Games is apparently the publisher for console games only. No wonder why every time I read articles about this, there always seems like there's like 6 companies involved. And I'm always confused why there's so many companies involved. Anyway, Starbreeze themselves isn't doing so hot, especially with all that recent news concerning them. Here it is. Starbreeze Studios is raided for suspicions of insider trading, and property is seized as well as one person arrested. And this was a Swedish article, apparently. It seems likely that the people accused of insider trading are the previous CEO and the previous CFO. They sold their shares for a fuck ton of money, left the company, and since then the shares have lost 80% of their value. Uh-oh, sounds like insider trading. Anyway, enough covering those criminals. And sorry for those involved who aren't criminals. That must suck to be involved where essentially the lead of your company is a criminal or doing criminal or nefarious activities, and you're sitting there just trying to do your job and put all your energy into something. So, actually, I kind of feel for the people who don't really have a choice in that matter, right? Okay. I wanted to talk a little bit about Nintendo losing their president, their American president, rather, Reggie Fils-Aime. Is it Phil? Yeah, it's Fils-Aime. I think that's how you pronounce it. I never knew how to pronounce his last name. I just call him Reggie, obviously. But apparently they're naming a new president, Doug Bowser, which, I'm sorry, that's just never not going to be funny. Call me a child, but somebody with the last name Bowser is just never not going to be funny working for Nintendo. But poor Reggie, man. I mean, I know, like, we've memed about him, and he's certainly been the butt of many jokes. I don't think he's been that bad, you know? I think he's kind of led them pretty well in America, especially with as much as he can possibly do for a company that ultimately just cares about the Japanese market. That's the thing about some of these foreign companies. I think American companies are a lot more interested typically in being global, whereas there's some Asian companies, more so in Japan and Korea regions, I've noticed this a lot, where they're a lot more focused on their specific region. So if their specific region isn't doing well, they don't really care about the other regions ultimately. The other regions are more like an extension. Nintendo has generally been that way, though I'd say that recently they probably started to kind of change that trend. Korea, on the other hand, Korea is very much that way. NCSoft, perfect example. Nexon, perfect example. These companies, if their games aren't doing well in Korea, they'll just shut them down even if they're doing well in America. They don't really care about the other regions as much. It's just all about extension, right? It's like if my main market does well, then in theory, the other market is just extra. I don't need to worry about it too much. Doug used to work at EA. Oh boy. Doug Bowser used to work at EA. I mean, what if your last name was Bowser, if there's a bad company that you worked for, it probably would be EA, right? Yeah. I'm thinking a guy named last name Yoshi would probably work for like Ubisoft. Maybe a Mario would work for Activision Blizzard. Don't forget in the tweet with Doug being announced, there were plushes of Mario and Luigi tied up. Did they really do that? I've got to find this press release. What's his name? Doug. I don't think it's Doug Benson. Doug Bowser. Twitter reacts. Okay. I just won't use your website then. That's okay. Congratulations, Doug Bowser. Reggie has a message for all of us.
Hi, Nintendo. Here.
Sorry.
By now, you may have heard the news. Yep.
I can't even hear this because I don't have my headphones on.
I wanted to reach out directly to you.
So I'll just stand here and just pretend that I'm hearing it.
Because there's one thing I really want to say. Thank you.
It's like the hat.
Thank
it just
you
makes you look like
never-ending support
about something.
And for your passionate love of Nintendo. And personally, for giving me a Mushroom Kingdom full of incredible
Man, he spent so long
I will never
at this company. That's just crazy to think about. Huh. I assure you, there's not a single Bowser works for Nintendo now joke lobbed at him. Gotcha. I mean, shit. I mean, he basically took a joke and made it his career. He was like, look, my last name is Bowser. I get it. You guys think that I'm related to Nintendo in some way? So why not just hire me as the president of Nintendo and just make this meme come full circle? I like full circle memes. So I hope this is a good signing just for the name value and memes alone. I like how we take a serious topic and then essentially make it a joke. Time to get some earbuds. Yeah, if I have to keep sitting in this costume, yeah, I mean, we just reached 50 subs again, so it looks like you guys are going to be keeping me in this outfit for at least another week. Thanks for the subs, by the way. I'll go through that at the end of the chat, so I don't want to make it too annoying for the people who listen on SoundCloud and don't actually watch. I don't hold it against you guys, don't worry. Okay, so let's go ahead and move to the MMOs on the go segment. I'm trying to move a little bit faster today. I've got to meet with Card after. We're going to talk about Star Trek Online, and I'm in the process of doing my Star Trek Online piece, so got to figure that out. Also, the Black Desert Online video that I did, I wanted to do a Why I Don't Play one, and it's been basically finished except for the actual video editing portion, which I'm doing myself on this one. So that one should be out by next weekend, by the end of next weekend, like Monday. And there should also be another Death of a Game out. That's at least what's planned. Yeah, that's the plan. I asked the guy that I bought this hat from. He actually was like, it was a legit hat place. I wasn't super happy whenever I was in Philly to spend a lot of money on a hat, but ultimately I knew it was going to be one that I wore for a while. And I remember asking him, I was like, hey, I don't even know how to wear these hats. How do you wear these hats? And he kind of was like, well, you just want to tilt it just a little bit. So if you guys see me tilting it over and over again, that's why I'm tilting it. He taught me how to be the nerd. All right, so I don't have a whole lot of topics to talk about with the MMOs in the Go segment, but there is a pretty huge one that we have to talk about today, and that's concerning ArenaNet having some major layoffs. Not yet, but there's been rumors that are confirmed that they're bracing for them. Oh, here's the tweet that you meant. Gotcha. Yeah, that does seem like an ode or a sign or an omen if I've ever seen one. that was honestly pretty good. But I don't know if that's necessarily the image that you want to kind of like be pushing, but it's all in good fun, right? Anyway, ArenaNet, as the article says, is bracing for layoffs. The owner of NCSoft, the CEO rather, says current situation not sustainable, plans for cuts across the board and merging of publishing divisions. He says, our live game business revenue is declining as our franchises age. Delays in development on PC and mobile have created further drains against our revenue projects, while our operating costs in the West have increased, where we are not sustainable, and it is not going to set us up for future success. So apparently ArenaNet in total has 400 people working on various projects, though the studio's main focus, as the article states, is Guild Wars 2. ArenaNet confirms in a statement, we can confirm that due to the cancellation of unannounced projects, ArenaNet will be making staff reductions. This is part of a larger organizational restructuring within NCSoft in the West, but the Guild Wars and Guild Wars 2 game services will not be effective, nor is any combining upcoming with game? Upcoming game content canceled. Now, this kind of statement, you have to take it with a grain of salt. Because last time I brought up a topic that was basically the exact same scenario as this, I had somebody tell me, well, it wasn't the team that was involved in the game, or it wasn't the team that was involved with the team. And it's like, how do you know that? Like, how do we know where they restructured things, what these unannounced projects are? They could be Guild Wars related, right? I mean, it is ArenaNet, the company. They could have been Guild Wars related projects. And so that's kind of like the interesting thing to me, is that you can take this at face value, but I find that taking this type of thing at face value is very, very naive. cutting a large portion of your workforce, which hasn't been confirmed yet how many they're going to cut, but it's going to be mass layoffs, whatever is considered mass layoffs, clearly means this is something you have thought through. And this doesn't really surprise me, considering that this news is released after the news of their financials hit the web. And for those who don't know, NCSoft publishes their financials on their website, as they have to as a publicly traded company. Can you do the wall leaning thing with that hat for fan service when you hit the new landmark? Funny enough, I have a bunch of footage of me dressed up in this. It just hasn't been edited yet and put into a video. My editor, he's been busy, and we're gonna have to have a conversation if like I need to get another editor, basically, because I've been wanting to put it out now for about 2 months. But we recorded tons of footage of me dressed up in this, tons of stupid scenes, but also some good scenes too. Anyway, here's the earnings release. We can pull up the earnings report for Q4 of 2018, which is the most recent Q. Now, scrolling down, the most interesting things to look for here are going to be down here. The section 2, or sales breakdown, is usually where I like to get into the information. This is where I've done most of my research. And that's because you can essentially see what games they have, like what stables they have out on the market, or in their stable rather, what games in their stable they have out in the market and how they're performing in relation to each other. So obviously this is in Korean won, I believe it's called. This is not US dollars, so don't think that it is. As you can see here, the first Q of 2017 made more money than every category or every other game combined times like 4 or something, like times 3. And then if you look at the rest of their performance over Q18, let's just do some quick math here, right? Like, let's just do some basic math. So 327, 101, 264, 106, 209, 909, 216, 490, 222, 793. Okay, so in total, mobile games made them 1 billion. Actually, wait a minute. Is that? It says mobile game sales was up Korean. Let me see how much US dollars is. Billion. Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to put. I didn't mean to put it like that. Okay, so 1 billion is equal to 1. Okay, gotcha. Korean won. So this is in the millions. Then I gotcha. Oh, it says it right there. I couldn't see it. It was in small letters. But anyway, that's million Korean won, right? What did it say? South Korean wons. Okay. They made 1.2 billion in just mobile games. Now, if we just, obviously, we don't even have to add all these other numbers, right? It doesn't take a genius to see that this number over here is pretty damn high compared in relation to these other numbers. However, the most important number here to me is this number right here. If you look at Q4 2018 for Guild Wars 2, Q4 for Guild Wars 2 looks very, very bad. And this is not good at all, because theoretically speaking, in a game that has a cash shop, the holidays is when you're going to make the most of your money. I mean, if you look at Lineage here, for example, Lineage had its strongest month Q14 or Q4, right? Lineage 2 had its strongest month Q4. That's probably because these are very well-established MMOs that have lots of events going throughout the holidays, right? That's generally why that kind of happens. You can have a drop sometimes in popularity because people can't play as many games during the holidays, right? Because they might have exams, or they might, have holiday. They might be on holidays. But the troubling thing here is that by looking at this graph, you would think that these are comparable games, right? Like if you look at Ion and you compare it over here to Guild Wars 2, its numbers now are a lot closer than they were by the beginning of the year. In the beginning of the year, Guild Wars had nearly triple Ion's revenue, right? Whereas now when you look at them, it's only just inches off from the same amount of money that Ion just made in Q4 of 2018. This is worrying to me because Guild Wars 2 is a consensus most popular MMO right now, right? It's been a consensus most popular MMO probably the last 5 years at least. But what I'm trying to say is that its financials don't really show that. And of course, that begs the question, why? Why is it that Guild Wars 2, despite its grand popularity, why can't it seem to make the same kind of money that these other games make? The easiest answer is staring us right in the face, right? It's the business model. It's pretty much the only game here that has a buy-to-play business model. Blade and Soul doesn't have a. Does Blade and Soul even have a buy-to-play model in Korea? No, I don't even think they have a sub model in Korea. Lineage has a sub model still. Lineage 2 isn't. Lineage 2 is free to play. Ion is free to play. Blade and Soul is free to play. And obviously the Western world. The reason why I question is weirdly enough, Lineage and NCSoft as a company started as a sub model company. They didn't do free to play originally. That was more so Nexon. They caught wind of it after, but it was kind of too close for that. Guild Wars 2, I don't think Guild Wars 2 is free to play. I don't think you can say that because yeah, I guess it's free to play with a base expansion, right? But is that really free to play? The definitions these days are getting more and more murky. People these days are saying that because the base game's free, it's not a buy to play. It's free to play. But I don't know if that necessarily constitutes that the game is free because you need the other games to end up playing, right? In any conceivable serious fashion. You still need the expansions. I mean, it's kind of like in Guild Wars 1, it had completely standalone expansions. So meaning that even if you bought factions or bought Nightfall, it didn't matter. You could still play the game standalone. Guild Wars 2 doesn't work that way. Expansions do cost, but you don't need them. Okay, so here's where I actually don't think you're right. The game might be free to play base edition, but the vast majority of the story content and content in the game, period, is based around its living story, the fractals, and all the different things that come with the expansion. So when a game is based on developer-made content, I've never really got the argument that buying the base game or by the base game being free, the game is free to play. I don't really agree with that because I think all of the content is still hidden behind the paywall. It's kind of like with ESO. ESO is a buy to play game where you sub and you can get access to the expansions, or you buy the expansions individually and you can play with the expansions in that way. The thing about ESO though is that it's even if the base game is free, it's not really a free game because you still have to purchase the other expansions in order to play the story content, which is the main point of the game. I guess what I'm trying to say is when I think of like a free-to-play game, I think of a game where you can basically play the majority of the content free. You don't have to buy anything. It's just more so that you spend money because you want to buy a costume, or you're incentivized to spend money because you want more experience gain or whatever else. But it made me realize, like, as I'm having this conversation, that really the ideas of the different business models have changed so drastically. I mean, Guild Wars has this interesting business model. You've got Lineage in Korea, which is still doing a sub model. But the majority of games that are launching these days are obviously using free-to-play models, and for good reason. And when the mobile game genre is basically making more than your entire stable of MMOs on the PC, it's quite obvious why ArenaNet, or in this case, their parent company, NCSoft, is deciding that it's time for some layoffs, especially in the West. Guild Wars 2, despite its good population numbers and good just, market share, period, it's not performing as well as it should be, monetarily speaking. And I know that's in relation to this mobile market craze and these other free-to-play games, which are blatantly pay-to-win in some cases. I know Guild Wars 2 doesn't have blatant pay-to-win, which is kind of why it doesn't do so well. It's kind of what I'm saying is its business model. I'm willing to bet my entire career that if NCSoft could press a button and change its business model, they would 100% change the business model. I have no doubt in my mind that they are not satisfied with its business model. And I mean, it's kind of being proven, right? Because despite all of the good news, the good market share, the good presence that a game like Guild Wars 2 has, it's interesting because I've looked at financials for, the past couple of years now. It's never particularly done very well. Even when it first came out, it had numbers in the 30 million won, but that's not really a whole lot when you compare it to Ion. Ion had the same kind of numbers. WildStar had the same kind of numbers at launch. I've always been surprised how well Guild Wars 2 does, and yet how little money it makes. This kind of explains why they haven't been able to churn out as much content as they've needed to. As the article continues to explain later on, that former writer at Guild Wars 2, Jessica Price, who is a total piece of work, obviously, but she said some pretty interesting things, and she certainly has a lot more information about the subject than I do because she worked at the company for a number of years. She said, ArenaNet had 2 projects in the works when I was there. One was indefinitely suspended while I was there. For those of us working on Guild Wars 2, our mandate was essentially to make it look like there was the same level of resources devoted to Guild Wars 2, when they were actually steadily moving people off of it onto other projects. It was bad enough at one point we were told that we could only have one cinematic for episode 5, All or Nothing, which, given that it was the climax of the season and had more emotional beats than anything else we'd done, at least while I was there, was devastating. Now, of course, last bit, just take that what you will, or take with that what you will. But her saying that they're trying to make it look like they're working really hard on Guild Wars 2 while they're working on other projects, I do not find that surprising at all. Because a vast majority of MMO companies that make MMOs for a living, meaning they've been around for like a decade plus, they have to work on other projects in order to diversify. And they can't put all of their eggs in one basket. Because really the MMO market is... it's so fickle. Like overnight, you can lose a large percentage of your audience. WoW is a perfect example of that. And so is every other MMO that ever launched, right? Perhaps that's why they are combining NCSoft West with the ArenaNet publishing so they can alter the Guild Wars 2 business model. So they're recombining them? I thought that they had them separate already. Because whenever I talk about Guild Wars 2, I often get people telling me, yeah, but Guild Wars 2 isn't ArenaNet or isn't NCSoft. You can't give them credit for that. And I'm like, ArenaNet's a subsidiary, buddy. They've been a subsidiary now since I could remember. That's a long time, okay? They've been under NCSoft's wing for a long time now. I think it's funny that because they started to publish their own games for a little bit, their own expansions, people were like, see, they no longer have Korean interest. They're no longer influenced by the Korean market. Come on, guys. It's a subsidiary. They own the company. You don't think they have influence? It was mentioned in the restructuring announcement. I'll have to check that out. Because I've heard the opposite argument mentioned to me all the time. Just the publishing. But that makes sense. My argument for why ArenaNet was doing their publishing in the first place was because they didn't want necessarily to have NCSoft's name associated with it, but also because Guild Wars 2, sorry to say, it's not a Korean title. It just isn't a Korean game. People will realize that about the game, right? The reason why NCSoft is so willing to cut their workforce, ArenaNet in this case, is because it's essentially not a Korean game. It's not a Korean game. I've said this from the very beginning. You can look up so many different examples of this. Try watching my Ion video, for example, as a really good example into how the Korean market kind of functions. But ultimately speaking, Guild Wars 2 was never big in Korea. And unfortunately, because of the kind of game it is, it has some things that could be big in Korea. For example, costumes, costume collecting is big in Korea, right? But I mean, I have German2 in chat, so I know he's very aware of how Korean games are typically function, or how they typically function. Guild Wars 2 doesn't really fall into that mold, so I find that it's the closest under the chopping block. Ironically enough, despite seeing these numbers, right, it still performed better than Ion, right? So why isn't Ion more so on the chopping block than Guild Wars 2? That's because Ion is still doing pretty well in Korea, and Guild Wars 2 just isn't. And I mean, if we look at regions, we can quickly see why the Korean region is the most important. Okay, so here's sales breakdown by region, right? Sales breakdown by region. Here's quarterly and here's yearly. Now, I really want you to pay attention to the numbers here. You notice anything in particular? What's the first thing that comes out to you guys? And by the way, I don't do this because you're stupid. I do this because I want you guys to work through this with me. Maybe the fedora makes me look a little bit more arrogant when I say that, but yeah. Pay attention to where it says US Europe in particular, right? Basically, the entire regions of US and Europe, which as my Europeans and US fans in the chat know, that's a huge market. That market, all of it combined, is...
Statement. Something approaching joy is now growing in my behavior core.
Actually, let's do the math. It's 155,201 times 100 divided by 613,936. So basically, the US and Europe regions make 25% of what the Korean region makes. 25%, right? Only 25%. Do you understand why, despite Guild Wars 2 looking like it's successful, is not successful in their eyes? Because to them, having 25% of a market is just not enough, right? It's chump change to them. They're making 75% more with their main market. And when you look at royalties, which is what they make off of sub fees, by the way, royalties is their sub fees. 122K in 2016. 42,000 from Taiwan, 49K from Japan. I mean, this is just crazy to see. It's been this way since 2016. When you look over at 2017, it's only getting worse. In fact, the Korean number doubled. It doubled. This number doubled. Look at this. Sorry, let me scroll it down so you guys can see the number. I see my camera's in the way. This number over here doubled. So let's do the math again for the most recent financials of 2018, right? So we have this number. Actually, sorry, let me do it the other way. How do you, there it goes. It's 128,264. 264. Divide or multiplied, right? By 100 divided by. Okay, so 10% of the US and Europe market. The US and Europe market makes up for 10% of the Korean market currently right now in 2018. 10%. You can't, like, a corporation can't even wipe their ass with 10%, right? As Kevin O'Leary would say on Shark Tank, 10% doesn't even get me out of bed, right? 10% for someone who makes millions of dollars and operates a $1 billion company, 10% is just like, I mean, it's basically, it's like, it's a tip, right? You leave a 10% tip when you go somewhere. It's nothing in the big scheme of things. And this is why this has me a bit worried about kind of like the future of MMOs coming from the Korean market, because it seems like the Korean market, they're not really taking us serious anymore. They're not taking the US and European market serious anymore. And it's so bewildering to me that we have US and European fans who defend NCSoft on Ion and these other Blade and Soul. They defend them on these games. And I mean, Guild Wars 2, by all accounts, is the Western, WoW, if you will. It's like of the new age. It's the Western blockbuster. It was a huge Western blockbuster. Very popular game. Huge market share. You can't go to the MMORPG subreddit without hearing the name Guild Wars 2. But then you kind of realize, like, that's because those markets are dominated by the US and European markets, except that those markets are 10% of the Korean market. So it's just, ultimately speaking, it's such a small thing. They could probably cut out every market outside of Korea and lose a small fraction of their actual profits. That's the thing, is that you have to think about it from the perspective of, it's so interesting to me. If you can't see, I'm passionate about it, because Guild Wars 2, by all accounts, is a game that is performing well, right? It's putting out content. It has a loyal fan base. It attracts new players. It has a pretty fair business model, right? The base expansion, or sorry, the base game is free. That's pretty fair. But it's still not making enough money. And ultimately speaking, when you are a subsidiary company of a company like NCSoft, that's what matters the most in the end. So I hope that there's not a whole lot of ArenaNet layoffs to happen, but I can't say that layoffs happening necessarily spells the end or anything, right? But it is a little bit worrying just to look at this trend of seeing how little the US and European markets matter, really, right? Anyway, we don't spend a whole lot of time looking at financials, so that was interesting. Thank you for sitting through that with me. Tried to make it as interesting as possible. All right, what other topics did I have to go into? Oh yeah, there's a kind of, it's a bit of a rant, but All right, I'm gonna make some jokes, okay? We've been a little bit serious. Let's make some jokes. All right, so check this out. On screen, I've got this you know, I love going to the MMORPG subreddit because it's the only place that something can get upvoted all the way to the top and be completely wrong, right? I'm just kidding, it isn't, but I always like saying that about this place. Anyway, sometimes they always say some interesting things about the market, or people ask interesting questions. This one was a funny post because, first off, it's a serious post. For those who haven't read it, it's a pretty good read. It's a pretty good read. Now, I'm not going to go through this whole thing. I don't really have the interest, not to mention I already did go through it. But essentially, it's a guy talking about his life experiences, how he discovered RuneScape and MMOs, and how he played them hardcore for like 5 years. And it says that too long didn't read. I used to play MMORPGs for 5 years and I quit and got a life. I'm doing good now, but yet I often feel unhappy and get intensely nostalgic about playing, or about the thought of playing again. Now, I thought this was pretty interesting. Okay. I'm trying not to spoil the punchline. I thought this was pretty interesting because I could kind of relate, you know? I went through a similar experience where I had to basically put my life on track because I was spending way too much time playing video games and way too much time playing MMOs, right? I had a similar experience. But then when I got to the end and I read that he had only been playing MMOs for 5 years, I thought to myself, those are rookie numbers. Are you kidding? 5 years? Sorry. 5 years? Come on, man. 5 years? 5 years. All right, sorry. I've got the outfit on, so I feel like I have to be the pompous nerd today. But no, sorry. 5 years is just funny to me. If you want to think about it, right? At this point, the first time I ever played an MMO was 2001. So that was 18 years ago. And that MMO was a social MMO named Habbo Hotel. The first multiplayer game I ever played was Diablo. The second MMO I ever played, aka like the first real MMO I ever played, was Guild Wars 1, followed by Star Wars Galaxies in 2003, 2004, around that time, right? And so sometimes I almost forget how long it's been. And so when I got to the end and I saw that he put 5 years, I was like, man, here was I thinking that I could relate, right? And then I get to the end and I'm just like, dear Lord, man, I spent 18 years playing these games. Anyway, that was just a funny joke of mine that I wanted to meme about. Yeah, Habbo Hotel is Taj Gun's like, that's not even enough to ruin your job prospects. He needs to get better. 5 years is like a warm-up. 5 years, he finally hits the end game and quits. I personally want to get into an MMO, but I don't see anything interesting. I wish I was there for Star Wars Galaxies. That one sounds fascinating. Let me dive into that, because I know we joke and we mean. I do feel for the next generation of MMO players, because I feel for them because I wish that they had a similar experience that I had. And that doesn't mean that they need to go back to the same exact game. I've never been a purist. I've never believed that you have to play the exact game that I played at the exact time and you're going to experience it the exact same way. Like, I'm not a purist. Like, things work in the past, things don't work. And so you have to look at like what they do right, what they do wrong. And that's kind of what I see as the future of MMOs, of course, is like looking at the past, trying to do what they didn't do, right? Implement better or innovate better, and then rinse and repeat. But it is a bit sad sometimes when I get asked from guys who don't play a whole lot of MMOs, and they watch my channel and they're just like, hey, look, I don't really play MMOs and I've been interested in getting involved in them. Do you have one in particular that you could recommend to me? And I hate having to constantly tell this person, no, I don't really. And even you can tell by the change in my voice, I get a little bit solemn about it. It's a bit sad. I feel sad that I can't really suggest something in particular based on my preferences. Now, if somebody comes to me with a stable of game and asks me a question out of one of these, what do you think? Then I would just ask them, okay, what are you interested in? What's your favorite type of experience? And then try and pinpoint whatever exists in the market. I'm still going to try and help because I feel bad ultimately. But I think about that sometimes, that there are people out there who didn't have those experiences that we did. They didn't get to play these games when they were still basically trying to be virtual worlds. And I won't rant too much about virtual worlds because that's one of my favorite things to rant about, as you guys know. But back then, it was about the world, right? And it was about the people in the world. These days, things have been gamified so much that it's just a game. Does anybody else notice that? These days, when you play things, after, you might have some fun, but then you think to yourself, and I'm talking about MMOs in particular, what did I do? Like, what was that? Do I want to keep doing that? And I know that sounds strange because I made this point when I was talking about Black Desert Online in my video, which you guys haven't seen yet. But I made a point similar to the fact of where it's like, ultimately in Black Desert Online, if you find the combat loop fun, and you find going camp to camp to camp, rinse and repeat to grind and make more money fun, then by all means, go play that kind of game, right? But what do you do if you don't find that kind of game fun? Because ultimately, that's a game, right? That's not a world. In no world do you go NPC camp to NPC camp, making money. Like, the real world doesn't work like that, right? Like, you don't just go and kill camps and make money. So they made things more about games. How much game can we fit into this 1 hour block of time, right? But what about the player who wants 2 hours of time? What about the player who wants to only put in 1 hour a day or 1 hour a week, but they have a goal that takes 3 months to reach? They lost a lot of that long form kind of progression. And I think really that's like a big hook for your audience is, if I can do this overnight, who cares, right? Who cares if I could do this overnight? But if this takes me 3 months and a whole guild, all working together and supporting each other, I mean, me personally, that's what I'm interested in. And so I realized as I got older, I always liked RPGs, and I still like RPGs. But nothing is more interesting to me than an RPG that you can play with your friends, right? That you can play with other people and meet other people. And it's sad to think that there's not a whole lot of new MMO experiences out there that I can suggest to somebody who wants to meet people, who wants to experience things, who wants to really dedicate themselves, you know? Have to put a lot of time and effort into their long-form progression. There's not a whole lot of these MMOs that exist on the market right now. And it's usually why when people ask me, what MMOs do you play? Or what MMO should I play? I just ask them what they like, right? Because ultimately, I know that this marketplace right now isn't the best for me, right? I mean, look at this Fedora, dude. They can't find a place for this. But that's okay, as long as I keep doing my due diligence to make sure eventually they do. Which is why I do this work ultimately. I love the MMO industry so much that above all else, I want it to succeed, right? If my career fails tomorrow, trying to be a failed YouTuber or whatever else, I'll get on with my life, right? I have other prospects in life. I can move on in my life. But I would never stop loving MMOs, and I would never stop loving games, and I would never stop hoping that they can push towards, you know, the future, push towards something more than what they are now. Which is, I'm sorry, right now, MMOs in many cases come across as just it's just like McDonald's, basically. It's just like you're eating fast food. You eat it after, you don't remember it. You don't want to remember it. In fact, it kind of makes you feel guilty. You're just like, all right. It's a McDonald's. That's how I feel, at least. Totally. I really want to experience the actual social aspect of an MMO while retaining actual gameplay. Bless is his main game. Bless is his main game. It's also probably why Star Citizen, Chronicles of Illyria, Ashes of Creation, Camelot Unchained are so successful in crowdfunding. Because so many people want to see something that's a bit more than just the average run-of-the-mill MMO missing the RPG. I also think that those are particularly good at cashing in on certain nostalgic aspects. SC is not nostalgia to me. SC is the future, the promise of the future. Sorry, Star Citizen, for those who don't get the acronym. Star Citizen is the promise of the future. That's kind of why people are willing to put money into the idea, even though it's just an idea, mostly. Chronicles of Illyria is kind of one of those that's almost like wanting to just punch the audience in the face, in the typical sense of being like, our game is not typical and you got to accept that. Not a whole lot of experienced devs working on the game. So the idea of like the permadeath thing is cool, but just seems like an idea to me at this point. Ashes of Creation, with their node system, is essentially trying to bridge the gap between a game and a virtual world. And what I mean by that, with the node system, they're trying to make it meaningful to interact with your environment because it gives you more XP, because it changes the way the game plays, etc. This concept is called emergent gameplay. Emergent gameplay is essentially the idea that you can't have the same experience again. And I know ultimately you always can, but what I mean is like, if I go to a orc village and I shout out some orc language to them and they respond to me because they actually understood my language, that's an emergent piece of gameplay. No one set that up. That's not, you know, an instance. It's not a cinematic or a cutscene. It's just another player noticing that I'm speaking his language, responding to me, right? That's emergent gameplay. What Ashes of Creation is trying to do essentially is bridge the gap between what is considered a game and what's considered a world. The problem is that it's still just a bridge, right? It's not the full thing yet to me. It's the in-between point. Again, we're talking about the ideas process. Anytime I talk about Kickstarter MMOs or MMOs that don't have working, playable, and easy to access open betas or playable betas, I always refer to them as if they're ideas, even though they have some sort of gameplay in place. And that's because ultimately speaking, if it was all about ideas, guys, don't you think I would have tried to make an MMO already? I mean, seriously, like, I've played so many MMOs. If this industry was just about ideas, why wouldn't I just make a game, right? But it's not just about ideas. About money. It's about support. It's about having the right processes and the right systems and the right infrastructure, the right resources, right? There's a lot more that goes into it. An idea is that. It's just an idea. It's essentially something that's not tested, right? Now, some people test their ideas, and I don't want to say that your idea is completely untested, but generally speaking, it's pretty untested. So right now, I can tell you guys, in my game, you will be able to traverse to the other universes, go at light speed, and really engage in emergent alien gameplay. My game in actuality could turn out to be instance space with instance hyperspace cutscenes to another instance location, followed by instance monsters or NPCs attacking me, right? It's not really that exciting, right? But I made it sound exciting. It sounded so cool. Like I could go anywhere in the universe and discover everything and all the different aliens. But then you play the game and you're just like, this is like a fourth of the idea. And I didn't start noticing this, frankly speaking. Story time. I didn't start noticing this until SWTOR. SWTOR was the first time that I really understood, man, I'm the reason that these games are letting me down. I'm overhyping them. I'm not looking at them critically because I want them to do so well, so badly. A Star Wars game and another MMO in the Star Wars universe, I wanted it to do badly so bad. And when we got what we got, I remember for me, it was just like, this was out of nowhere, I kept saying. This totally caught me off guard. I was so surprised by it. Then I started looking back at it all, and I did my video on it. And then I was just thinking to myself, I wasn't really surprised. I would have known. If I followed the signs, the gameplay footage that they released at PAX was horrible. I'm sorry, it was horrible. But why did I deal with it? Why did I stomach it back then? Because I wanted it to succeed so badly. Basically, I was sold on the idea of it. Another Star Wars MMO that's all about story. That idea had me sold, right? I was a mark. I was totally sold. But what we got was basically a single player game with multiplayer features. And so that was like the first time I really had a super high expectation of something that was just nowhere near, remotely near what it ended up being. And it really made me evaluate myself. Like, why was that? Like, how did I think it was going to be something totally different? And part of it was the Star Wars Galaxy's nostalgia. Part of it was I loved Bioware as a company, one of my favorite companies ever. Well, I don't know if I could say that anymore. RIP. And Star Wars, one of my favorite franchises ever. Really was just a perfect storm, right? But it wasn't, obviously. And so that's just, to me, a perfect example of how you can only take an idea at face value. You can't take it that seriously. Because ultimately speaking, until we can actually play any of these games, Ashes of Creations, Chronicles of Illyria, Crowfall, Camelot Unchained, Star Citizen, etc., Fractured, until we can play these games and actually they function the way that they were advertised to us, the way the idea advertised it to us, I can't feel in good faith that I can suggest that to somebody else. So that's why I never really, and I've mentioned this before, but I never really like to suggest crowdfunded MMOs to people because it's just like, I don't feel confident in being like, hey, that's a good way to spend your money, right? I have to feel good about that. And so the question really is if you believe enough in the idea and you're willing to part with your money, support a crowdfunded MMO. I'm not saying don't support them. We need to support crowdfunded MMOs because we need developers who aren't being corralled and held by the hand by a publisher, by a big publisher, right? We don't need any more of that. We already have that. Look at the 4 or 5 biggest players in the space right now. ZeniMax, Bethesda, Activision Blizzard, right? Square Enix, right? And NCSoft. These are huge, massive companies, right? Of course their MMOs are working right now in the space. There are different skins of each other. They've got the resources to essentially afford that kind of game. It's going to be the crowdfunded MMOs that probably innovate. It's going to be them. They might fail. Isn't that kind of funny how that works? To be innovative, you have to take risk. To take risks, you increase the chances of failing. The reason why the big players in the market seem so similar is because they're blatantly similar. It's business. If you like, again, anyone who understands business, and if you don't, just do like basic 101 class, you'll understand this concept really early on. Anytime you look at a market, the top players are almost always inches away from each other. The things that are different are the intangibles oftentimes, is the story, is the background, maybe they have a message, right? But generally speaking, at the higher levels, the products are pretty similar. And the MMO market is no different than that, really. The products are pretty damn similar. For me, it's more of a matter of how much money is it going to take to do something innovative that's exciting enough that pushes the market forward, and then the big corporations decide to copy that and turn that into a game. That's essentially how the market's going to function. At least that's how I see it. Because again, I'm just using my knowledge of other markets. Boom and bust period. During a boom period or the bubble period, every MMO was working. Every MMO was hitting. And then boom, that bubble popped. Everyone realized they can't be WoW. They can't get WoW level numbers. And they started just basically just copying WoW outright. That didn't work either. And so people stopped being innovative. They stopped copying. And now it's almost just like the only MMOs we get is basically from the Korean market, right? Or the Asian market. Because they're still working over there, but they're not really working as much over here. There's a lot into it, huh? It's a bit of a mess, but
you've got the wrong guy.
do we consider instant-based games like Diablo and Neverwinter MMOs? I never did. As a kid, I never considered those to be MMOs. In my eyes, Massive was always described as thousands of players. But I've had this discussion before. There's too many semantics when it comes to discussion about MMOs, and I feel like I'd like to be one of the people to start that conversation. To actually start holding people accountable for like terms, terminology, right? And obviously, in particular, I just mean like, what is considered a massive multiplayer online game? If massive is 20 players, Neverwinter falls under that category. If massive is, 4 players or something like that, 32 players, lots of shooters fall under that category of massive, right? But how much is considered massive? Like, how many players? Like, where do we draw the line? On a single server, on an MMO single server, oftentimes the player cap is going to be, I'd say about 1,000, right? Like, we've seen 1,000 to about 2,500 on a couple servers. I would say that's pretty fair. So if we're seeing a lot of servers that have 1,000 player caps, that's why people kind of assume that massive meant 1,000 players. I think it was just like almost coincidental to some extent. But it's also because, of course, the people who came up with the term had no frame of reference for what massive would be. Like back then, massive in a mud was like 10 dudes in the same chat room or something, right? And Habbo Hotel, like 30 dudes in the same room was massive to me. Like, I didn't know what the concept of massive was until I played a massive multiplayer online game, like one that I could truly consider to fall under the moniker of massive. Albion, Darkfall, Dark Age of Camelot, WoW. WoW not recently, but WoW, old school WoW. Those games to me felt massive. They felt big. Like the worlds felt big. People, there's always people around you. Obviously, Galaxies, my favorites. Those worlds felt big to me. I mean, Galaxies, of course, is one of my favorite examples to make because you could travel to different planets, and on different planets, there's different people living there. So, I mean, it really felt like a massive world. Not just a single world. I mean, like, the actual, like, roleplay world. My first true massive experience was Bazaar Day in the tunnel outside Freeport. That's I know exactly where that is. That's so cool. Hey, appreciate the subs, the gifts actually. AKH, he subbed Leva 98989 and iRamies. That's 24 in total. We're at 53 overall. I think I should change my infographic. I'm actually getting kind of close to the end of the podcast, honestly. I was really tired today, not feeling so great. And if you guys want to know the truth, I actually forgot about my outfit. I'm glad I already had it because I would have been in trouble. But I already had it, of course. It was just about in working shape. The only thing that's a little bit off is I would have liked to kind of not blow dry, but iron my sleeves out. They're a little, you can see, they're a little bit kind of gritty. But other than that, it's working. And I'm not burning to death in here, so that's always a good thing too. I thought I was going to sweat my ass off. Yeah, Eve. Yeah, exactly. Eve definitely nails the massive aspect when it comes to MMOs. me see if I had any other topics that I wanted to get to here. No, it doesn't look like it. Okay, I'll go ahead and open the floor up to everybody to ask any questions you guys would like to ask. Let me change the section. Yeah, we're at 53 subs overall. AKH is, I don't know why I cannot say your name today. AKH. Oh, it's probably because of my mouth. Sometimes I forget to drink water. Anyway, as AKH is saying in chat, we're at 53 subs overall, which means that as long as we stay over 50, I keep wearing the outfit. That's how I can rationalize sweating to death. But if we can get to 100, I wanted to do a special stream, like a karaoke stream or something. Maybe a karaoke. It's actually 54 because I sub too. All right, well, fair enough. It's 54. Thank you, Fruit Hoops. That's a good one, by the way. All right, so yeah, I just gonna go ahead and open up the floor to all kinds of questions. If you have any questions and you'd like to ask me them in Discord, you can join the podcast lobby channel. Excuse me, as you can tell, I'm losing my voice. I did my voiceover yesterday. It's always funny trying to talk to people out in, like, you know, the real world or whatever, and they like hear my voice and they're just like, they probably just think I sound like I smoke 16 billion times a day and I'm a literal ashtray, but it's more like my voice after 5,000 words in a row just it just dies. Anyway, if you have any questions you'd like to ask me in voice chat, you can join the podcast lobby channel on my Discord. That's discord.gg/nerdslayer. Card is in the chat and queue you up. You can't make it in Discord, it's fine. You can @ me in Twitch chat and I will answer your questions there. Looks like German2 has a question, so I'll go ahead and answer a few of these in chat and then I'll drag him in to see what his question is about. The first question I have is from Ramis. Is it Ramis or Ramis? Sorry, the Hispanic in me is trying to pronounce that. Ramis. What should I ask? Well, okay. What do you think about Funcom MMOs, Anarchy Online, The Secret World, Age of Conan? So, Funcom is quite possibly one of the most interesting MMO companies, I think, period. I don't really think it's debatable. Because when have you had a company just really just create almost just polar opposite kind of games? Like, you have Anarchy Online, which is a very deep, very analytical, and very traditional sandbox. Whereas The Secret World is almost entirely a story-based experience, right? And then you have Age of Conan, which was mainly about PvP in the end, though it did have a big push initially towards raiding and stuff like that. The interesting thing about Funcom is that they have great ideas. Like, you cannot dispute the fact that Funcom has great ideas. I don't think you can dispute that. Look at so many of their games. Many of their ideas have been taken. Other companies take their ideas. Funcom comes up with all the best ideas. But they're damn horrible at implementing them. They are horrible at implementing their ideas. Every damn one of their games I play is a buggy mess, dude. I'm sorry. At this point, I got tired of trying to, you know, beat around the bush with Funcom. I tried to play Age of Conan, and at one point I was going to do an Unchained stream where I played Age of Conan Unchained. That's like the free-to-play version. And literally could not even buy anything in the shop. Like, the shop wouldn't even work. And I'm thinking to myself, you guys can't even get the part of the game that makes you money down right? After all of these years? And the game still performed like it did back then as well. So I remember I was just like, I threw my hands up. I was like, look, I recorded some footage on my Age of Conan video, but I didn't get as much as I wanted because, sorry, I'm not subjecting myself to that shit. Have you ever considered... Oh, 1 second. Did I miss another one? If you're keeping the outfit, then get some earbuds. Yeah, I'm gonna look into doing that. I appreciate that, Zella. I think Card mentioned that. The Secret World is one of those MMOs I wish just had a better combat system. Such an interesting world. Totally agree. Also love the questing system in that game. One of the best questing systems ever. I can't wait to cover that game on Death of a Game. Not because I'm happy that it's not doing particularly well, especially after its relaunch, but because I think it's so interesting that I'm really interested in seeing what flaws it does have. Because like that's the cool thing is I'm addicted to learning. Like I just love learning, period, and I love MMOs. So like this channel allows me to combine learning with also learning MMOs. Unfortunately, I do get certain things wrong, which reminds me before the podcast end today, I want to talk about some of the big criticisms that I have concerning my Dirty Bomb video. After every Death of a Game, the next following podcast, I want to address some of the biggest points of criticism from that specific video or geared towards that video, because I kind of see it as, instead of me replying endlessly in the comments, which I do sometimes because I generally try and read every single comment, I end up answering the same questions all the time. So I'm thinking I might end up just doing like almost like a post fight analysis sort of thing on my podcast following a Death of a Game. But I'll do that a little bit later. Let me get to some of these questions still first. Have you ever considered throwing your name in the hat for an MMO, meaning offering a company help, whether it be ideas? I assume you catch my drift. I can reword it if you like. No, I understand it. And actually, I'm totally open and willing to be a consultant. Consultancy, funny enough, is actually the career path that I will likely end up having, or would likely end up having if I didn't do this. Like, if I didn't decide to do YouTube, I'd be a consultant. Because I enjoy analyzing things, looking at their strengths and weaknesses, and then evaluating the correct or most effective way to solving those issues. Like I genuinely find that interesting. I love mysteries for that reason. I love to build the case and then figure it out, right? That being said, what you'll often find is that people aren't so willing to trust somebody who they can't control. I think it's a little bit part of it, is that companies don't come to me as much because they're a little bit more afraid that I'm going to be honest, I would say. But I also think the other aspect is that if I were to sign a contract to want to do consultancy work with a company, I would be very serious about it. Like, I would not take it as a laughing matter. It wouldn't be a joke to me. Like, I'm not saying I couldn't have fun. I'm saying that if a company really wanted to bring me on as a consultant, they would pay me accordingly and I would work accordingly. That being said, I don't know why people haven't really leveraged that exactly. I mean, I can be the first to tell you many people have asked me advice. If it's longer than like a question or a paragraph, I don't typically respond because I'm sorry, guys. I'll answer all of your questions because you're not asking me how to make games. You're asking me about just, personal questions about what I think or your idea about this or that. But when you get good at something, never do it completely for free, right? So I'm not going to advise people how to make good games for free. So sometimes I get developers who think that I do that. I will never do that. So you will have to pay me to have my undivided attention. I've always been that way because I believe that's the best relationship to have with somebody, is that you're essentially paying them for the content that they give you. And anyway. Time to start putting together your consulting prices. Funny enough, at the moment, they're not very high. They're not very high because I want to get more experience, specifically with consulting MMOs. I've done, obviously, some work with Amazon. The unfortunate thing is, though, and obviously I'm under NDA, so I can't talk about any of the shit that I said, but someday I will be able to after NDA is lifted. I can tell you guys everything that I told the developers face-to-face. One of the problems I've realized is depending on the time in which they bring you on in the project, depends on how much you can actually affect things. In the case of Amazon and New World, they brought content creators on basically after they already had like a working model of the game. So that kind of means that like they can polish things, but they can't really change like the essence of the game. So I'm more interested in being involved in a game in early processes. That way I can stop problems from happening before they happen and not have to sit there with the giant elephant in the room trying to tell a company, $1 billion company, that maybe we should think about some other things. But that's all I'll say. Other than Bloodlines, do you have any... Actually, let me bring in Germatu first before I answer the rest of those questions. Hey, did you have a question?
Yeah,
Let me put my headphones on so I can hear you.
you're good. Just let me know when you're good.
It's probably a good idea, right? I look like I'm like an underground DJ right now, holding my headphones up like this.
You're good. Yeah, that works. All right. I think my question changed like 3 times, but I'll just do a quick one because I don't want to take up too much time.
Okay.
So I was fudge, I just had it on the tip of my tongue. Oh, now I remember. So the original question I had was about the whole MMO definition, and like, it's actually funny that that was brought up because I had a discussion with a few people on the server for that, and
Sorry, this guy's like, you look like a French World War II resistance radio operator.
that's pretty good. Yeah,
All right.
but you're fine. I was just discussing with 2 of the other people on the server, and it wasn't like negative or anything like that, but it was just like kind of a back and forth thing. And it was actually kind of an interesting topic because most people think massive, they think thousands of people on the same server and all that. And it's like, for me, you can argue that, but at the same time, I don't think that really counts because you don't see all those people at the same time. Because there's no game you can really see like a lot of people on screen at once to that scale, save for like, for me, text-based mods or like Eve games like that. Because like even with WoW, technically speaking, like yeah, you can see up to like 50 people in an area, but when you go into like the later content, quote unquote, like instances and stuff, you're not with everyone else on that server. You're only with like a small group of people. So to me, I don't think like that necessarily counts in a sense. Like I don't think player scale should really be something that should be the only gauge for it. And I look at say like Warframe and people say, well, that's like a lobby shooter. It doesn't really count. And it's like, yeah, but I look at lobbies in the same way as like you know,
An instance.
raid finders and all
Yeah.
that are done too. Yeah. So
I
to
think I see
me,
what you're saying. Yeah, like that's honestly, it's a really fair point. Is if somebody's gonna have the discussion with you, where they're gonna say that Warframe isn't an MMO because it's a lobby-based game, then I mean, yeah, basically you can immediately ask the same question with a game that they like that's an MMO. You can say, well, what's so different about a game that has like 16 different instances, and
right.
it only
And
lets you have up to 20 or 30 people in that instance? It's like this. It's not any different. I'm with you. I think it's very similar.
yeah, and the other thing that was brought up was, the whole persistent world thing, and again, that I don't think there's any game that really does that besides maybe Eve, and even then it's like kind of debatable. Like there really isn't, like, at least modern day online games, you won't find anyone with a real like persistent worlds. I don't even know if that can really be used as an argument, because like that goes back to our topic last week where we were talking about like virtual worlds and how no MMOs really do that anymore. Most games are just treated as like a service, and that's really it. So I don't know. It's just how I feel. Like, yeah, at the same time, the whole, I guess, definition you could say has been like kind of muddled to the point where a lot of games can be labeled as such, even though they're technically not. But I don't know. The definitions kind of vary too, because like no real game follows that staple, definition. Like you said, when the guys came up with that back then, like in the 80s and 90s, I'm pretty sure Massive Sim was like 20 people in one server.
That's what cracks me up though about, many of like founding fathers of any industry. People will often say like, "Oh, well then like what did the founding fathers think?" It's like, well, what they thought is so different than what people think now because everything has changed. So it's like maybe back then Massive was 20 players in a room. That probably was massive at one point. I mean, shit, for
Yeah.
me, 20 players in a room in a LAN party was massive, all right?
Yeah, trust me. I remember doing LAN parties for, Unreal and all those games back then in the late 90s, so I'm very well aware. But yeah, I don't know. I always think it's like just a fun topic because you always have people with different definitions of what an MMO really is. And, then people go with the argument of like, well, League's not an MMO or Counter-Strike's not an MMO. It's like, technically not necessarily, but I think they are part of a subgenre of MMO. So technically they are. I don't know. It gets a little like finicky when you start getting into the subgenres and specific ones like MOBAs and all that too. So I don't know. I just don't think there's technically a concrete definition, and if there is or was, like, no game really fits that these days. Most games don't, anyways.
It's like I've never really waded into the territory of answering the question of what is an MMORPG, because it sounds like such a simple question. But I actually think it's one of those questions that's so unbelievably hard to explain that I'd have to do like a fully produced, like basically a documentary on it. That's what I want to do. Like in the future, I have serious interest in doing a documentary on answering the question essentially of what is an MMORPG, because it means so many different things. So I want to go to essentially the source, but also talk to people who grew up maybe in a different age, who can talk about what their view of an MMO is as well. Because, I mean, for me, if I want to be elitist about it, which honestly speaking, I'm getting more and more that way. And what I mean by that is that I'm getting more and more the way where if it doesn't fit into a certain category based on, you know, certain specifications, I don't think you can assign it to that category. And the reason why I say that is because MMOs lately have become a buzz thing to say. Like everyone wants to be an MMO and be like, yeah, massive multiplayer. I'm an MMO, like, you know. And then you're just like, are you really an MMO? Like based on the idea of like what originally was an MMO, are you an MMO? The answer is usually not. And so I think if anything, we need people to be more elitist with the term MMO and actually hold others accountable when they're using it as a marketing tactic.
Yeah.
But I also agree with Fruit Hoops in chat. He says he doesn't think it's really fair to set an exact number on massive. I mean, obviously, none of us are an authority, including me. I mean, I have some level of authority, but I'm not an authority. So we would all have to have a conversation about it, like as MMO fans, about what we think is fair to describe as massive, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, and that's what I mean is that you can't really go off just numbers because, like, I guess you say online games themselves have evolved so much since then. And it's one of those things, at least for me, you know, I've been going back, especially the last few months, and just watching a lot of you know, behind the scenes and developer kind of documentaries on like older games especially, and even like, you know, your older death of a game videos where you can see that yourself, where it's, oh yeah, you know, this game, it was made so long ago, and this is like the beginnings of like how it was done, especially when you look at the late 90s, like EverQuest 1 and even like Final Fantasy 11, like all those games, and how that kind of you know, got first put into perspective. And I mean, heck, I remember that. Like, I remember, for me, I didn't play EverQuest 1. I watched my cousin play it on dial-up, and I remember, you know, I was, let's see, like 99. I was probably like 8 or 9 when that came out, and I remember watching him play, and I just thought like it was the coolest thing because up until that point, you know, I'd only played stuff on like Super Nintendo and somewhat PlayStation, and it was like, yeah, that's cool. But then like you watch, and I remember like him explaining to me the concept of like, oh yeah, you know, this guy right here, he's my friend. He's from this many states over, and then this other guy, he's like on the other side of the world. Like that whole concept was just mind blowing to me as a kid. And then, you know, I got to experience it. Actually, you know, which I'll get into another story about how that works. But like, you know, Final Fantasy 11 was technically my first MMO as a kid because I had that on PS2, and that was a nightmare setup. I still remember that.
I remember the first time I tried to play Final Fantasy 11, and I realized you had to have a sub fee for it.
Yep.
I was so like heartbroken, man. I like installed all the discs and everything on my PC. I got it at a yard sale. I mean, most MMO discs that I would get, I get them from yard sales because people would realize they're MMOs and sell them, and I would buy them for obviously like super, you know, cheap amounts.
That's actually how I got City of Heroes, was through a yard sale. We went up the street when I was I think I was a teenager at the time, like a preteen, and we were going through one of the garage sales up the street, and this mom had like City of Heroes like never been used because I guess she bought it for her kid and then didn't see like that it required a subscription fee on the back, and so it was like it was never open like at all. And so I remember begging my mom to just get it, and then trying to explain to her the concept of like a sub game, and she's just like, but why? Why should you have to pay extra for a game? That's stupid. And that was just because, like, up to that point, I'd always paid for games myself. Like, I would, do chores or do menial tasks around and get money and buy games myself. And so, like, with I think City of Heroes, that was probably the first time where I couldn't just do that because they didn't have time cards for it. You had to set up a credit card for it. And so, trying to convince my mom for that was tough. It's a tough time, and I mean that's a topic for another time. Like, my friends like to joke, like, yeah, we had to hustle back then for it, and yeah, in a way, kind of was.
It was pretty much the same for me, and it's just funny to think that. I mean, the kids that are going to grow up in the future now, they're probably never going to have that experience because I don't think future MMOs are really going to be based around sub fees anymore. I mean, it's obviously been pretty odd. I know I'm not saying anything revolutionary, but there
Yeah,
hasn't been any evidence that it's making a comeback. So
yeah, it's always funny having my second cousins ask me about that too. Like, I remember in particular one of them asked me, like, this is probably a good year or two back, like saying, "Oh, you guys, is it true you guys didn't have like this and this?" And he was like just naming off stuff like tablets and all that. I was like, "Yeah, I don't think any of us really pictured it even back then when we were your age. I mean, besides through stuff like Star Trek, which a lot of people don't know, that kind of is what led to a lot of the modern actually devices we have is from Star Trek because like." I don't remember the exact story I was told about that, but someone said like, "Oh yeah, the concept of like tablets and cell phones actually came from Star Trek because of like the concept was so cool back then." And it's just kind of funny to think about. Like, yeah, I can see that. But yeah, the way off tangent. But yeah, my main. I'm sorry, I do that a lot, but the main thing was just like like I don't know definition of MMO, and like you said, maybe it is just a case of people need to kind of not really talk down, but like discuss it and really get a more set in stone definition of it, because at this point it really is kind of just tossed around to the point of losing most of its meaning at this point.
yeah, that's the thing. Ultimately, to essentially um to put a bow on it. Ultimately, if the term itself becomes meaningless because it has too many meanings or not a specific meaning in itself, then yeah, I mean, essentially, there's no reason to call anything an MMO anymore because nobody's going to fall for that marketing anymore. People were falling for it for a bit. Anytime someone said MMO, it was working as marketing. But I saw something interesting where the previous developer slash CEO at Blizzard, I think it was it Rob Pardo? I think he said that these days you're not really going to see people advertise it as an MMO as much anymore because it's almost like a bad thing to advertise as these days.
Right, right. I mean, it's like one of those stigmas now, like of game genres, where it's like, MOBAs were like that for a while. I remember when like League blew up and all these games came out of MOBAs, and then
Yeah, on the way up, when the market's on the way up, everyone's like, "Yeah, I'm an MMO, I'm a MOBA." But then when you're on the way down, you're like, "Okay, we're not really an MMO, we're not really a MOBA."
or like you said, the whole WoW killer thing. Like, I remember actually a more recent example was when not this last expansion that came out last year for a while, but the one before it. There was a knockoff kind of copy of WoW that came out. It was like an quote Asia's version of it that was coming out in the West, and literally its trailer, and I've linked in the server a few times. I'll link it later on if we get back on topic about it. Was like, "Oh, Legion, oh, forget about that game. Come play this instead." And it's just like, oh man, that's still a ballsy thing to do. I mean, the game failed unsurprisingly because it was crappy, but it makes me laugh when you see smaller games trying to take jabs at bigger ones. Like, Rift did that. Remember that? It's like this isn't Azeroth anymore. And it's really funny to me thinking back on that.
Yeah, I agree. And I thank you for stopping by and asking your question, and also explaining or sharing with us your experiences. It's
No worries.
I think on the surface, it's so easy for people to say that a game is a game, but MMO players can't say that so easily because MMOs just aren't games. Like anyone who says an MMO is just a game just doesn't understand, essentially what you can do in that type of world. I mean, at that point, it's not just a game, right? It's way more than that. So I've always found that to be the coolest part about MMOs is that it's one of the few genres that you're playing where if somebody says, "Hey, it's just a game," you're like, "Well, not really, man. Like, we're all here online in a world pretending to be other people. Like, is this really a game, or are we living another life?" But anyway, thanks for stopping by. I appreciate it, everybody. Thank Germa2.
No worries.
For asking questions.
My luck, I'll probably be back on next week anyways. But thanks again, man. I'll see ya.
No problem, dude. See you later. It's a lifestyle, yeah, exactly. All right, my headphone shit was, I'm sure, pretty entertaining. All right, couple more questions. Go ahead and at me in chat if you have any more questions. I'll be on for another maybe 17 minutes or so. So not a whole lot for call-ins. I did want to do a little bit of the Dirty Bomb section, so I might just go to that if I don't have a whole lot to talk about now. It's funny, Limpos shows up at the very end, which is when I'm actually going to do his favorite part of my process. For those who don't know, Limpos hates when I read YouTube comments, all right? Go up on chat. Okay, let me go read your questions up here. Okay. What are your thoughts on all of the games launching classic versions of their MMOs, such as WoW, Lineage, and Rift? Well, first off, I don't think Rift launched a classic version. I think it launched a progression server and disguised it as a classic version, as did Lord of the Rings Online. WoW is launching a classic server. That's confirmed, as is Lineage launching a classic server. In the case of Lineage, it's following a fad, most likely. WoW is about the only case I can think of more recently that I feel like is a true attempt at being a classic game. Like, I mean, it seems like the only classic MMO that's trying to be a classic game. Right? I feel like the other ones are just sort of either being progression servers with classic content or fads. I don't have the highest opinions of those non-classic games that are progression servers. Other than Bloodlines, do you have any interest in the rest of the World of Darkness IPs? There are some rumors that Paradox might go for Werewolf the Apocalypse game to ease people in to test the waters before a VTM game. Wait, Paradox is the one that does the Werewolf games? Or are you talking about Werewolf? I'm not familiar with the Werewolf series under World of Darkness, so you'll have to confirm with me what that means. Do you think that is a good strategy, or would you urge them to just go straight for the much-wanted Vampire the Masquerade game? The thing that, I don't know if you saw that earlier, when we were talking about it in chat, but I think kind of the problem with the whole Vampire the Masquerade thing is that we're not having any of the same developers involved. So we shouldn't just automatically assume success, right? Like, let's just think about it logically for a second. Publisher acquires a license or an IP. In this case, Paradox buys World of Darkness, does nothing for 4 years, and then all of a sudden there's rumors surrounding a possible new Vampire the Masquerade game coming out that's already been rumored to have been worked on by the company that did Blacklight Retribution, which is apparently a multiplayer-only company. So meaning, like, I feel like currently the evidence shows that there's more reason to suspect that it won't do well than it will do well. But obviously, mostly undecided unless we get more examples. I'm just saying that, unfortunately, if you want Bloodlines, you'll have to play the Outer Worlds. But if you like World of Darkness, just for the IP itself, which I would say that I only got into it after I heard about Vampire the Masquerade. So a number of years back, I did a White Wolf campaign, and I only did one because I heard about it from Vampire the Masquerade. So I don't know. I don't know if I'm making sense exactly, but that's my alarm telling me that I need to get off. But I think I made some sense there. Let me scroll down a little bit to see what you said. Werewolf is one of the White Wolf's pen and paper RPG set in the World of Darkness. Okay. I knew I heard of Werewolf. I just could not remember where it was. Yeah, it'll sell well for the name value alone, not to mention the White Wolf franchise, or or, you know, that D&D franchise, that roleplay universe is desperately needing a game. I don't think it's had a game in some time besides its more recent mobile game that came out that people didn't seem to like at all. I think people hated that mobile game, in fact. So I don't know. We'll see. As you can tell, I'm not super optimistic, but that's because whenever you change the development team, there's no reason to be optimistic. You understand? Like, I don't really have a reason to be optimistic unless I just want it to do well, which I surely do. I wish it will do well, and I hope it does the best. And I would love to play a werewolf game. From the sounds of it, that might be more up my alley. I thought you were talking about werewolf as in the Mafia party game variant of werewolf. I was like, I love that game too. I really enjoy a good crafting system within MMOs because generating my own equipment out of time... I gotta scroll back up. Out of time spent mastering skills needed to create it feels phenomenal to me. In your best vision for an MMO, what kind of crafting system would you implement? Also, what mechanic and gameplay loop is one that you are most strict about developers getting correct? Those are very interesting questions. So to answer the first question, the crafting system that I would implement is one that first and foremost solves the problem of things becoming useless. And what I mean by that is that you need a reverse engineering or a salvaging system. Those have to be in the game. There's no other way around it. That's how you allow players who grind essentially useless gear, you can keep them relevant by allowing them to break down that piece of armor that they would junk sell to a vendor and actually be able to extract the value out of it and sell it to somebody. So reverse engineering or salvaging is an absolute must. Other things is that PvP, or the main conflict of the game, if it's PvE or survival, whatever kind of game it is, it needs to be based around crafting, meaning that you need resources in order to craft what you need to play the game. So if we're playing a PvP game, I need resources to make armor, I need resources to make trebuchets, I need resources to make a keep or to build my walls, etc. That way, there's always an integral part of the environment that must be harnessed, right? Like a resource. You need some, just like in the real world, you need a resource that must be harvested, and most importantly, is a scarce resource. Because if everybody can get gold, then it doesn't matter. But if gold only spawns in X regions, well, now you have to trade with people from that region. So that's another thing, regional trading, regional loot tables. Balanced loot tables for regional capabilities, meaning certain regions, in my opinion, as in the real world, should have more mountains, therefore should have more minerals. Another region could have more water, therefore has more water resources. Maybe another reason or another area has more trees, so it has more wood as a resource. I think making areas resource specific is also super integral in creating a good crafting system. What mechanic gameplay loop am I most strict about? I would say, man, that's such a hard question to answer. What mechanic and gameplay loop is the one that you are most strict about? I'm gonna have three answers for that, or three different answers for that, because I feel like that's such a hard one to answer. For one of them, if you make your game full loot PvP or non-consensual PvP, there better be things in the game for people to do other than PvP. And what I mean by that is that if I'm Joe Blow from the Old Timers Guild, which is a real guild, by the way, of old, players who band together, and I'm playing an Old Timers Guild, I don't have the reflexes to match the young whippersnapper, and I don't have the time to match the young whippersnapper who can level way more than I can. But what I can do is use my knowledge, my experience, my wisdom to get me ahead. And most games don't allow for you to do that because they don't allow for you to do other things in the game besides just fight. Because as MMOs became more game-like, they divorced from the world aspect. Whereas with the world aspect, you have to have other activities in the game. Otherwise, there's just always war, right? I mean, think about it. Like, if we go back 1,000, 2,000 years when we were warring a lot more, it's because essentially we had nothing else to do and we were fighting over scarce resources and territory, being, so closely put together and being giant tribes of people. So, like, that's why we used to fight and have to war and whatever else. When you have a game that focuses so heavily on PvP, but doesn't allow for things like farming, doesn't allow for things like tree chopping or lumberjacking. It doesn't allow for mining, fishing, little things like that games have, but they don't make them integral to the actual gameplay loop, right? Meaning that when I'm playing a PvP game, I should have to, as we talked about with the crafting thing, go get resources. I should not be able to just show up every single day and fight. That's not how games should work. Like, take that back. That's how a game works. That's not how a world works. No war is won by just soldiers, right? Everybody understands that concept. A war is not just won by the foot soldiers. It's won by the generals. It's won by the artillery. It's won by the supplies. It's won by the civilians. It's won by the factories, right? There's so many other concepts that go into it, meaning that if you're going to center your game around this conflict, you need all that other stuff. Otherwise, it's just wolves killing wolves and killing sheep until all of the sheep quit, and it's just wolves killing wolves until, well, you know how that ends. They run out of sheep to kill, and they get bored. That's what happened in Darkfall, to the T. So that's probably one of the things that I'm the most strict about, is if your game is PvP centric and you not adding all of that other layer of a game, because basically your game is just 100% gonna fail if you don't do that. I know I said I had a couple of more, but honestly, that's a pretty good one. The rumor is that they're aware of people wanting the next game to live up to Bloodlines and want to temper it by bringing a separate IP set in the same universe. That would make sense, Riordan. That makes sense. I hear you talk a lot about Galaxies and the things you liked. I'm curious as to what you think were the strengths of Guild Wars 1. How would you contrast that to Guild Wars 2? So I would say that Guild Wars 1 to me is one of the best games I've ever played. One of the best games I've ever played. Notice how I didn't say MMOs. It's because Guild Wars 1 is, it's interesting, right? It's basically a lobby game. I mean, what Germatu was mentioning, Guild Wars is that. It's got instances. In each instance, you have a town instance followed by a PvE instance. So once you leave the town, you get to the PvE instance. Essentially, that's how the game works in a nutshell. Meaning there's no persistent big open world. It's not always the same. It's mostly instance, and you could have 6 instances of the same city. So it had many of those issues, right? That I've mentioned with regards to being too much like a game and not enough like a world. But then why did I like Guild Wars 1 so much? The reason why I like Guild Wars 1 so much in particular, for me, is the way it handles skills and class customization. Guild Wars 1, the meta, the skill, and all the brain power and ability, if you will, is focused into one thing, making a build. That's how you play Guild Wars 1. Make good builds. If you have good builds for the right scenario and the right team comp, you're going to do well, whether that be PvE or PvP. So the beautiful thing about Guild Wars 1 is that everybody knew that at the higher level. So when you showed up, you had 16 different builds ready to join a different character. People were well-rounded. They could play a number of classes. They could play a number of builds. There was so much variety in the game because of all of that being the case, and there being like thousands of skills. And since skills in PvE had to be obtained by PvE players, meaning you had to get a signet and have to go capture those skills, that meant that you couldn't just play the game as a PvPer. You had to use your PvP character, unlike in Guild Wars 2, to actually to either try and unlock it with your Balthazar faction points, or get your PvE player to go actually unlock a specific ability that you can only get from a particular boss or a particular mob. Meaning that is a hook to make sure that you are spending time out there in the world. If an MMO takes that exact same idea and puts it in their game, they'll probably have a much better time at it because it's not so instanced as Guild Wars 1 is. So those are probably like the biggest things I would say that I liked about Guild Wars 1. The other thing is the same thing I liked about Halo 2. And that's that it's matchmaking. There's so much playlist variety in Guild Wars 1. I mean, there's hero battles, there's 1v1s, there's faction wars, there's AVA, Alliance versus Alliance, there's Guild versus Guild, of course, the name of the fucking game. Guild versus Guild. Sorry, as you can tell, that's a point that Guild Wars 2 really annoyed me on. There's Guild versus Guild, random arenas, meaning everyone's a solo queue player, team arenas. There's Hall of Monuments. I could keep going. I mean, that's the thing about Guild Wars 1. It has so many playlists and so many different ways to play the game. That's what I love the most about it. What do you believe will happen to BioWare once and if they shut down? Do you theorize they might disperse and be assimilated into other big studios, or start their own akin to Obsidian, like a phoenix rising from the ashes? Well, considering the majority of their major talent already left and formed other studios, I wouldn't expect them to rise from the ashes like a phoenix. If anything, I think they're just going to disperse within EA or be gobbled up by other companies. The IPs? I don't know what they'll do with the IPs. That's what unfortunately speaking, EA will sit on dead IPs. They will. They will sit on IPs. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that Dragon Age, that Mass Effect, that KOTOR 1, those different IPs could be shelved and maybe not have any more games. Have I played older BioWare games such as Baldur's Gate 1 and 2? Yes, but I played them posthumously. So I might have a slightly different view of them than maybe other people do. Same thing with Planescape Torment. Okay, so the last thing to get to is I wanted, as I said, to finish this podcast by going over a couple of the major points of criticism that I had on my Dirty Bomb video. Now, I'm going to be doing this on each Death of a Game, like the podcast following. I want to address the major points of criticism and then essentially try not to talk about it anymore. So I won't be responding as much to comments anymore, but I figured it's much better if I could just do it all at one place, one time. I'll have everybody know I asked a couple of people to come on and talk to me about Dirty Bomb, or talk to me about the video in particular to see what they disagreed with on, etc. A couple of people from the MMORPG subreddit. Obviously, none of them are to be found. They knew I was wearing the fedora today, so they didn't want to get fedora'd. But no, in reality, it's just that it's funny that people just won't put themselves out there if there's a chance that they could be wrong, huh? Funny how that works. Oh, I put myself out there all the time, and I am wrong a lot. Because it is impossible for me to spend 2-3 weeks on a script that's 8,000 words and make no mistakes. It's just impossible, right? So I've kind of like accepted that as much as I try and control for issues. Now, one particular mistake, I guess you could call it that. I hesitate to call this one a mistake, but there's one particular point that people brought up concerning the Dirty Bomb video, where they mentioned that there's a part of the video where I talk about the loadouts. And then I go from talking about the loadouts to then talking about ranked mode. And so I didn't do a good enough job of telling people that when I mentioned Cobalt loadouts, and then Cobalt and ranked, I meant Cobalt players. Because, I mean, I don't see why anyone would think I wouldn't think that way, but I mean, let's just go along with the meme that people think that I thought that loadouts gave you some great, secret power. I didn't think that way. I thought that they were skins tied behind a loadout that essentially could not be purchased except at a bronze level, which is a good point that I did not make in my video. You can purchase every loadout in the game at the bronze level. My main point was that you can't purchase them at the Cobalt level. And that's because that's where the actual skin is, right? The actual skin doesn't really happen until you get past, like, I think, is it gold rarity? Or point being is you don't really notice the skins before then. So I made a mistake in not explaining when I meant Cobalt loadout versus Cobalt ranked players, but I'll make that distinction now. When I said that in ranked mode it came down to who had the most Cobalts, I meant Cobalt players. In the same way that whenever you play CSGO and you're with your Smurf friend who's one rank below Global Elite and there's a Global Elite on the other team, you're gonna lose to the Global Elite. So that's kind of the concept that I was trying to describe. I didn't do the best job of kind of delineating that, I think, right? Like I mentioned loadouts and Cobalt right next to each other, and for some reason they made the ranks the same as the loot boxes. I'm not sure why they did that, but they did. So I can understand why people got misled by that. Yeah, so the Cobalt thing is definitely an important one. Can you help me get my $120 Founders Pack back? That money's long gone, dude. I'm just kidding. Nah, I don't think I can get your money back, man. Sorry. Okay. So other points of criticism. Let's see. All right. So another very common thing that I saw mentioned is people didn't like the fact that I was mentioning specific mercenaries as problematic in the game. Now, I found this to be a little bit interesting because this is the most blatant example of how being at the higher percentage of skill in a game makes you almost delusional when it comes to reality. And now, to explain what I mean, a very competitive player is willing to go to just about any lengths in order to perform at a high level. Correct? This means that when you release a class such as, or mercenary such as Phantom, which has an invisibility, this doesn't really translate on the highest level to being a very good class. Most people who've played shooters can agree with this. At the highest level in MOBAs, highest level in shooters, highest levels in RTS, you become better at dealing with cheesy things, correct? Right? People would probably agree with that sentiment. What I find interesting, though, is that I had a couple of Dirty Bomb loyalists automatically just dismiss Phantom and say, oh, he's not OP, he's easy to deal with. Except they're not worried about how you deal with it. Let me say that again. The top 1 to 5% is not a big enough audience to keep the bills or keep the lights on, right? So they don't care if the top 5% can deal with the character. They care if the top 75% can deal with the character. So it was so interesting to see literally contradictions from people, to see elite fans of Dirty Bomb say Phantom, what's the other characters? Rhino, Kira, no prop. Fragger, no problem, right? Well, most people said Fragger was a problem. Another thing I didn't mention enough in the video. I mentioned that Fragger could cook grenades. I did not mention that he could do 2 of them right after the other and blow them up in your face, which is pretty freaking OP. So I do take fault for the Fragger one. Anyway, point being that when it comes to how the hardcore audience treats something versus the casual audience, it's never going to be a 1-to-1. They're going to disagree. The thing is, though, is that if your niche audience isn't big enough to carry your game, it doesn't matter what the elite's opinion is. I'm sorry, guys. You hardcore players who've spent 3,000 billion hours into the game, many of you did not make good arguments as to why the game failed. Many of you made arguments as to why it failed in the competitive setting, right? That's a vacuum, essentially. That's a small subset of the population. This tiny, statistically speaking, right? This tiny. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5% of the audience is the super elite audience. How much of the audience is the casual audience? It's nearly always the majority of the audience. So if casual fans are saying Phantom is a problem, my point is Phantom is a problem, right? Regardless of if I think he's a problem or not. Did I necessarily find him a problem? No. I mean, he's another stealth guy. Like, come on. Like, yes, the shield is a little bit OP, and they nerfed that. But besides that being a stealth guy in shooters, I mean, come on. Spy is not taken seriously in TF2 competitive, right? It's not taken seriously. But at the competitive level, or sorry, at the casual level, if it's a big enough issue to cause people to literally quit the game, which is what they're saying, it's an issue. So I brought this up to kind of illustrate that although somebody with 3,000, 5,000 billion hours into a game might seem like the person to trust at first glance, what you'll often find is that they make many very simple logical errors because they're so invested into the game. To describe what I mean here, let's talk about cognitive bias. This is one of my favorite things to talk about, and I'll show you exactly why sometimes being an expert is almost one of the most harmful things that you can be. In regards to taking a look at something from a macro perspective. Sorry, let me add that little disclaimer. Okay. So we've got a couple of different cognitive biases mentioned here, but I'm going to go ahead and point out the very obvious one, right? blind spot bias. This, to me, is probably one of the most common ones you see off the bat. It's essentially because somebody has only seen from the high level, as if I'm only looking upwards, all of a sudden they look down, they can't relate to any of that anymore. Because when you're playing with guys who can land shots as soon as you peek a corner, your expectation of a typical shooter is a little bit different, right? When your skill is that good, you got a little bit different of an opinion. The problem is that you're so good at the game, you trust your opinion of the game. Therefore, you form a blind spot because you're not looking at it at other factors. For example, why a character could be harmful to the casual audience, right? You don't look at that. You don't look at how a game's monetization is very off-putting. That was the main thing that was so strange to me about 30 Bomb video, is I had people debating very specifics about the microtransaction model. For example, saying, oh, you can buy the bronze loadout. Okay, but the other skins are still randomly generated. So why didn't you address that part? You're only addressing that part because you know that's the part that I didn't necessarily make the best argument about. What about the other parts? And then then some rhetoric that I get is, well, 56 hours, you do that in a week, buddy? Are you crazy? 56 hours? That's like a month of me playing video games. In the same vein, I get, it's not really 56 hours. If you do it with the blah, blah, blah modifier, but you could do it in a couple of days, right? So that's the idea, is that I have to meet the casual audience and I have to meet the hardcore audience. The funny thing about the hardcore audience is that I often find they are the most wrong about things because they see it from such a small lens. Like, if I was like looking through a lens of something, I don't have anything. Actually, if I'm looking through this little cap, my view is pretty narrow, right? But if I take the time to take a step back and read people's reviews and look at, common criticism and what developers have admitted in the past, for example, the developers themselves admitted this. But this is something that you won't often see mentioned, of course.
A bit of shaving to
this
do.
will require essentially a concession from
Both
somebody.
ET, but we also wanted to really be in charge of.
All right, so listen to his little monologue here.
30 Bomb really started with the desire of recapturing some of the magic that we had in both ET, but we also wanted to really be in charge of our own destiny and the destiny of the game.
We started out with playing a F-ton of Wolfenstein. It was a lot of fun. Most of us had played it, but some of the team hadn't. And we then started replicating Gold Rush and the base mechanics of
I'll tell you when he
Wolfenstein
says the
in
most
Unreal,
important thing.
so
Check this
Unreal
out.
Engine 3. We thought a lot of other games who were in London or set some maps in London, they were all the time. So we wanted to get something. Well, in the earliest days, you had 2 versus the Axis. It was that the minimum spec for. Didn't start that way, of course. It was only engineers. It was proxy.
I'm trying to find the particular part. I can't remember
When
exactly
we were
where.
first thinking about it, I don't think we were anticipating the numbers that we.
All right, here we go.
It was really tough to get that balance right, but I'm pretty happy with how it turned out in the end. And that's how we came up with objective specialization and letting them do it faster. And it was really tough to get that balance right, but I'm pretty happy with how it turned out in the end.
At the time when we were talking about it, I don't think that we would end up with over 9 million installs. When we were first thinking about it, I don't think we were anticipating the numbers that we ended up getting.
No, I think it's fair to say that we didn't know the requirements. This was.
Did I miss it already?
Do.
Did they say it in the very beginning and I missed it?
Of recapturing some of the magic that we had in both ET, but we also wanted to really be in charge of our own destiny and.
There's a particular quote that I'm looking for. I have to find this
So
now
we
because
wanted
it
to do
literally
lots of
drive me
VFX.
insane.
So we had this list of the ones we wanted to improve while we were in beta. So that was probably the biggest change because obviously.
Oh, yeah,
we
by the way,
went
for
from
those who are
loads of mercs
tuning
to having
in
very
out of
few,
context.
which was cool in a way. because it
I was just
gave us
thinking
a
about the people
different,
who tuned in out of
way to
context or
look at
looking
the
at me
game,
holding
different
my
way to play
headphones
it.
up in the air. Like,
As soon as it came out of
why is this guy holding his
open,
headphones?
we realized that we made the game for a very small
It's
group of
the
people.
costume, guys.
Yeah,
I have
it's
to find
a
this.
really common
My
thing in the
brain gets
industry,
in a certain way
especially
where,
in
like,
the early days
if
where
I don't
you would-
find the
you
particular thing
essentially
that I'm
make the
looking
game
for,
yourself.
it'll literally like drive me insane until I find it. Okay, it's on my timeline. Okay, Check it out. It's at 3:55. It actually just happened. You guys probably just heard it.
Right, we have an idea.
And open, we realized that we've made the game for a very small group of people.
Yeah, it's
okay. Let's
really
Out of close and window open, we realized that we've made the game for a very small group of people. For a very small group, close and window open, we realized that we've made the game for a very small group of people.
So that, yeah, that was the quote. What that quote is essentially saying is that they knew that they made the game for too small of a niche, and they were trying desperately to get away from that niche, right? When Dirty Bomb first came out, it was this very competitive, kind of like old school enemy territory experience. That's how it felt for me. And then the point that I made by introducing new mercenaries is that over time, they clearly made it more and more casual. And so what I always found interesting about the people who would debate about specific mercenaries being OP or not is they ignore that the Dirty Bomb devs themselves said that they changed the game from how it was originally. And they were happy with that. Right? What are you gonna do? Sometimes people don't want to listen to the truth because, as I said, they get a couple of these different biases, such as they get a confirmation bias, focusing only on information that confirms their existing preconceptions. So because they play the game and they have their exact perception, they're only interested in that confirmation being confirmed. They don't care about anything else, right? As long as you can give them data that says that their opinion is right, that's what they're most interested in. Someone who's kind of caught in a confirmation bias. If you're wondering how you don't get caught in confirmation bias, you gotta ask questions. You gotta ask questions, that's for sure. Anyway, I think that's just about it. I also have to go to the restroom, so I figure this is a good time to stop the podcast. I want to thank everybody for stopping by today. It's my first time wearing the outfit. I'm slightly sweaty, which is good. I'm not like drenched in sweat as I thought I was going to be. So I'd like to thank everybody for stopping by. I told you guys it was going to be about 2 hours. Went a little bit over, but that's okay. Ultimately speaking, just a few minutes over. I'd like to thank everybody for stopping by today to watch episode 23 of the 6 Pixels Under podcast. I am nerdSlayer, your host. We went over cognitive biases. We went over my Dirty Bomb video. We went over just about everything that we mentioned at the very top. So like I said, thank you for stopping by. Yeah, it was a good one. See you later, guys.